scared him away.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Bedford Township Board of Zoning Appeals for April 1st, 2019. And if everybody will at least take a turn in introducing themselves, and then we'll do the pledge.
Kyle Dersch, citizen at large.
Jake Lake, citizen at large.
George Welling, chairperson.
Tom Zebek, liaison from planning.
Dick Steiner, Township Board.
Phil Goldsmith, Township Attorney.
Jody Rector, Planning and
It
Zoning.
is now. Thank you.
And Jake, would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, Jake. And you want to take a roll call, Jody?
Mr. Dersch,
Aye.
Mr. Lake,
Here.
Mr. Welling,
Here.
Mr. Zebek,
Here.
Mr. Steiner.
Aye.
All present.
Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
And if everybody had a chance to take a look at the minutes, chair's entertaining a motion to approve the minutes from March 4th.
Make a motion, we approve the minutes of our March 4th meeting.
Second that.
All in favor?
I'm going to
Aye.
abstain. I wasn't here.
Okay.
Aye.
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 Okay, new business. Chair's looking for a motion to open public hearing, and then we'll have Jody take over and give us the story.
Motion to open the public hearing on 639 King Road, Temperance, Michigan, 48182.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Jody, would you please give us the details on this?
Yes, the applicant is Richard W. Mitchell, 639 King, Temperance, Michigan. Has authorized Mr. Brusco to speak on his behalf. Property number 5802-360-01900, approximately .20 acres, R3 zone, single-family residential. Requesting a 40-foot front yard setback, a 800 square foot area variance, a 3-foot height variance, 102 square foot rear yard area variance, and a variance to construct an accessory building in the front yard on a corner lot. The applicant is seeking a 40-foot front yard setback variance to construct an accessory building in the front yard on a corner lot. The property consists of .2 acres and has 2 front yards, as it is located on the corner of King and the undeveloped portion of Armstrong. The schedule of regulations requires a front yard setback in an R3 single-family residential zoning district 25 feet from the road right-of-way and 25 feet from the center of Armstrong for a total of 50 feet from the center of the road. While the existing dwelling is a prior legal nonconforming structure having a front yard setback of only 6 feet, the proposed 30 by 40 accessory building meets the required side and rear yard setbacks. However, due to a corner lot and having 2 front yards, a variance of 40 feet off Armstrong is required. Per section 400.1903 accessory buildings in an R3 single-family residential zoning district, the cumulative and maximum square footage of an accessory building with less than .25 acres is 400 square feet. An accessory building shall not occupy more than 25% of the rear yard, thus requiring the 800 square foot structure area variance and 102 square foot variance of the required rear yard area variance. The Planning and Building Department have reviewed the proposed rendering and determined the wall height to be 8 foot 4 inches and the overall height of the building to be at 11.52 feet. Clarification from the applicant that the actual wall height is 8 foot 4 inches, and that is per the building official. Per section 400.1903 accessory buildings, the maximum height permitted is 12 feet. The applicant has indicated in the submitted letter from his legal counsel his practical difficulty is there is no other suitable location to construct the accessory building on the parcel due to the corner lot, the size and shape of the lot, and the property abutting the undeveloped portion of Armstrong. At this time, no letters or calls of objection have been received. However, the applicant has supplied 2 letters of no objection.
Thank you very much, Jody. Well, looking at the crowd, I guess, Mr. Brusco, would you please come up there and ask if you have anything to add?
I'd be happy to. Tony Bresco on behalf of Mr. Mitchell. This is one of the more unique lots in Bedford. Not only is it a corner lot on a small parcel, but the Armstrong being an obsolete road really brings us into a real unique category of practical difficulties. From an overview standpoint, if you guys had a chance to take a look at the Google Earth type overview image of it, you can see it butts up to the new development that comes in off of Lewis. I can't remember the Eagle Ridge or something. I can't remember the name of that right there. And we've got this dead end, obsolete, useless alley right behind it. And then even Armstrong, I believe, as Jody and I were looking at the legal descriptions, is technically being shared by the applicant and one of the neighbors who's on the other side of Armstrong, because it's not even an active road at this point. So there's a lot of dynamics here that make this a really unique setup. And what Mr. Mitchell has had drawn up by his contractor is quite frankly a really appealing design, layout, and structure that's going to clean this particular area up a lot. The variances that were sought, that we're seeking, are the bare minimum necessary. With regard to the height variance, I included it in my application because me, as an attorney, a non-contractor construction person, I wasn't sure where the apex of the roof was going to fall with a 512 pitch. But as it turns out, that this is just regular 2x6 construction, and it's not going to go any higher than that. So with that pitch, we're going to be under the height requirement anyway, and I don't even think a variance is necessary for the height at that point in time. We're not going any higher than normal 2x6 construction, so I think there was like 2 inches for a sill plate and another 2 inches for a different plate, and I don't even think we were at 8 total feet on those walls. So I feel pretty comfortable that we're going to be under the 12 foot in that mark also. Overall, what we're requesting is just the bare minimum to put this very attractive building in what is basically a dead corner in Bedford. There's nothing going on there. I submitted a couple of photographs just so I could indicate and depict what the current parking situation is and what's driving the motivation behind getting a nice structure that'll house a couple of automobiles, because right now they're parking on this. I don't know that it's a traversable. I mean, you can clearly drive down it. I don't know that the public would have a reason to drive down it, but they're parking on an alley. And there's nothing between the alley and the house. There's 10 feet or something like that. So they're nearly parking in that little alley right there. And this will at least get those vehicles off of that and prevent any potential, not likely, potential injury, property damage, things like that. So it really would be a benefit to have this structure in place so we can get a driveway leading right into it and get automobiles off the roadway. So you guys have my paperwork. I'm not going to rehash the details of it. I'm happy to answer every question you have, though.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Bresco, I actually had to ask Ms. Rector for some clarification, and I don't know if anybody else has asked this question. You may or may not know, so I'm going to bring it up first, is when we refer to Armstrong Street, the part that is abandoned and part of the property in the legal description is behind, at the south end of his property. It has nothing to do with the part that the applicant is parking on, which runs north-south. So it has nothing to do with that piece. It's strictly behind the
Correct.
property. So I don't know if anybody else knew that or not. I just clarified that with Jody to make sure.
And just for clarification, when Mr. Bresco came in, we did go down and speak with the assessing department, and they did clarify, because the language in the legal description does lead you, if you did not get clarification, to think it was the portion of Armstrong. But Mr. Bresco was aware of that because we did go down and speak with the assessing department.
Yeah, it is a little, even looking at the topographical maps, is a little misleading as to exactly what's going on over there, because you can turn south on it, but then it continues on behind the properties.
It
And
goes
that's,
this way,
it does.
technically.
It technically goes that way, and you can't really see it because of some of the overhead pictures have full-grown trees in it, which makes it difficult to see that it curves back to the west, but it does, and that is non-traversable. I mean, that's completely dead land, creating an additional buffer between that other neighborhood and the proposed structure. that extra alleyway there is even a little more depth to this lot.
Sure. Question, it looks like there's an existing accessory building on the property currently, and looking at the drawings, it looks like that would have to come down if
It's
a new
gone.
building. It's already gone?
Yeah,
Okay.
there weren't photos recent enough. I think what happened is before the applicant came into my office, he prepped the property last year before the cold season, and the property's already graded completely down to, I think he's even got a gravel base down there, because I drove by the property and I pulled over there, and it looked really nice, seeing it as clean compared to what I could see from the topical views of the historical pictures. No, it looks real nice, and it's a perfect plot to receive the proposed structure.
Can I ask, we talk about a garage, and this is a huge building. We're talking 1,200 square feet, and if it's really for a garage, your average garage is probably about 22 by 25, which is only 550 square feet. Or even if you bumped it up to 24 by 26, that's still only 624 square feet, and we're looking for double that. So this big enough to house 4 cars.
Yeah, it's long.
So
The depth is
It's not really
significant.
a garage. It's a pole barn, full building. Pretty much.
Smaller dimensions, I'm sure, but yeah, I understand. It's somewhere in between, I would venture to guess.
And the reason I go down that path is because I know that just by those numbers, it exceeds the 25% rule of property use. So that makes it even more difficult. If you got down into some of those more conventional garage sizes, then you wouldn't have that issue.
Frankly, it's the business about the old road and all that makes sense, but the size of the garage, it kind of caught my eye also, because that's a variance of 800 square feet. And I kind of wonder what they're going to be using it for, or why is it that big?
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. I'm
no,
not
you have.
intentionally remaining silent. I was, the use of the property wasn't part of the applicant's explanation to me.
Okay.
All I can indicate is he reached out to, I want to say Mr. Havers, I can't remember who the contractor is, it's somewhere in the documents, but he reached out to his contractor for some drawings, and this was the proposal they came up with. I think the idea is to have something that was uniform on the property, if you will. You go from the house, and there's a decent gap between the house and the garage, and from a side yard setback standpoint, they matched, I think, within a foot or two of what the house was doing. So they just created a symmetrical look to the property from front to back.
By looking at the drawing, the home itself was only 28 by 28. So this thing you could fit the home inside this place and then have room left over. I want to hear more from my fellow board members, but one of the things I do want to point out that is if this variance would be approved by the board, one of the things that we have done in the past, and I'm just sharing from historical perspective, is some of the restrictions that we are allowed to put on the property, such as no commercial use, no storage of other than personal vehicles, no farm equipment, and you see the path that I'm going on. Those are the kinds of restrictions that can be put into place if it was so inclined to have an approval on these variances.
And I wanted to ask Phil, the second page of his letter, in italics, it talks about the variance may only need to be 400 square feet if it's determined that the additional 18.5 feet of the abandoned alley are not calculated in the current square footage. And a little trouble following that. Are they talking about using the road as part of his property?
And Tony can correct me if I'm incorrect, but what I interpreted that to mean is that this parcel has a specific legal description, and that part of Armstrong Road that's been abandoned or is not in use is not calculated as part of that legal description, and therefore not used for the square footage that would apply to coverage of the lot. Even though that portion of Armstrong's not being used, and if it was dedicated in the original plat for roadway purposes, it could be vacated. I don't know if anyone has ever undertook that process to vacate it. It would have to be approved by the Monroe County Road Commission and the township, and then you would split it in half, and one half would go to the property owner on one side, and one half would go to the property owner on the other side. So I interpreted it to mean that its area, if you go out there and you look at it and you see it, it may look like it's part of this gentleman's lot or legally described lot or legal description, but in reality it's not. It was dedicated, I'm presuming, in the original plat for roadway purposes. Right, wrong, or?
No, that's exactly right. And so what Jody and I came across is that when we were reviewing the legal description, you know, initially, this is Lot 30 of the King's addition to the Village of Temperance, and then it says plus 18 feet of the alley lying south and adjacent to the side lot, or the SD lot, and I believe we construed that to be side lot. So my analysis had to be, I don't know if it's counted or it's not counted, but if it wasn't counted, and I think what we figured out is that it actually was counted in the square footage, so right, so as described on the township's website, the square footage includes that 18.5 feet, but I couldn't tell that. Right. And if it hadn't included it, it would have bumped it up a category, that 18 by whatever it was, right. Abandoned alley.
What Mr. Steiner was saying too, if the board is inclined to grant the requested variances, you could simply say this building, and it really should go without saying, but I'd want you to make it part of the motion if you're inclined to go in that direction, is that it can only be used for permitted uses within an R3 residential zoning district, period. And then you can go on and take the next step and just to clarify it and make it very clear, no commercial uses are allowed in the building whatsoever. No business may be run out of that building unless by chance it might comply with our home occupation ordinance, things of that nature.
I think what you're leading to probably there is like having your own little body shop and things like that. Repair shops.
Yeah, we would not want that in that R3 zoning district, period.
Because then you get into environmental issues too with oils and solvents and things like that.
Should be used for parking of vehicles. I have no idea. Maybe the gentleman has a boat, maybe he has a camper, maybe he has a classic car, that sort of thing that put it under roof. But if he was here, we could ask him. But and do you have telephone contact with him?
Yeah, I spoke to him today.
Would it be possible for us to take a quick break and see what his intention is?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would like to do that.
No, I'd be
Okay,
happy to.
5-minute recess?
Sure. contact with his client. He's kept them on the line, so if the board has any, board members have any questions for Mr. Breskel relative, I guess, to any issue relative to the variance request.
Well, I guess the first thing is, we were both asking what the, what's? Yeah. Meeting's back in session, call it to order, and the first question is, what was his intended uses?
So Mr. Mitchell just indicated he's a retired individual. He's got 4 automobiles, 2 motorcycles, and a boat, that he uses for his cottage property, and he's just looking for covered parking for everything.
Any other questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I may, you probably already asked him, but are there any plans at all for any type of commercial uses, body work, mechanic work, anything like that?
No, and I did ask him that, and there's no intended commercial use, and I think he stressed the word retired when he answered the question.
Yeah, we know
All right,
that
well,
works.
good for him.
Yeah. If there are no other questions, Chair will entertain a motion upon
Do we
somebody.
have to close the public hearing?
Mr. Chair,
Is that-
we need to close the public hearing.
Yeah, he just told. Oh.
I make a
Everybody's on
motion to
the
close the
schedule,
public hearing.
I'll support it.
yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Now, again, Mr. Lake?
I actually have a question for Jody. I don't know if we have any information on this, but what is the size of a typical R3, what is the size of a typical R3 zoned residential lot?
Frontage and area. Is it 60 feet of frontage?
I think they run 60 to 70 feet wide by.
An
100 to
R3 is
140.
approximately 7,200 square feet in area, 60 feet in width.
By what, 120 deep for 72?
Oh, you can back into it if it's 7,200 square feet,
That's what it'd be.
60-foot lot, yeah,
120.
yeah.
Okay, thank you,
You're welcome.
that helps. So I'm looking at the lot for this gentleman here, Mr. Mitchell, and it looks like he's got 50 feet of frontage on King Street, if the diagram's correct here. Certainly has more length, but definitely not width.
Jody, just real quick again. So in the numbers, are we calculating 50 feet wide by
78.
160 or 178.5?
And we're calculating for what on that? You mean for the rear yard
Right.
required? Actually, we're looking at it as Armstrong being the front yard for that building. So you would be looking only at it as from the 100 and, I think it's 68. And I will say that the building official actually determined that calculation on requirement for that.
Okay, so it'd be 160 because the total length shows 178.5, and that 160 plus the 18.5. So it'd be 160.
For the total width of length of the property?
Right.
Yes, and Dennis did calculate that and determined that because of it being 2 front yards, he looked at it as the accessory building would be facing Armstrong. And so when he took half of the building back to the property line to the 50 feet from the home, it would be encroaching. apologize. I don't have that information that he left me when he calculated it.
Because I'm looking at the drawing too, and at the back of the proposed garage, it shows 8 feet to property line. So, which would be the sideline if you're facing Armstrong, is the front.
Right, and he's only required 5 feet from the side yard.
Is he locking it up? No, it's not the whole size. The whole size. What do you, 20 by 30 feet? Oh, it's the size of it. Yeah. Mr. Brusco, is your client committed to a 30 by 40?
That's the only authority I'm here with.
Okay,
I mean, I'm not here with negotiating powers, if you will.
I understand.
I would, as I understand the layout, I know Jody had kind of clarified the position because of the way that the corner lot creates 2 front yards. But I construed it to be that had it not been a corner lot, that the only thing we really would have needed was the 1/4 rule and the overall size rule and everything. All the other setbacks were fine, but for the 2 front yards. So yeah, we're back to the size. You know, I don't know if anybody else had a chance to drive back there. All I can indicate is that as drawn, as proportioned, this is gonna be tastefully done in that little area. It's not gonna look like an eyesore. There's probably 5 similar sized on your way down King Street to get to it. I made note of that. It wouldn't be out of reality with what's existing on there. People have obviously come in and either not come in and not been caught, or have come in and sought variances for some of the other accessory buildings out there, and they all look rather nice. I think when you have these small homes, you need the extra space for storage, is what's going on a street like that.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask Mr. Brusco a question? Tony, that portion of Armstrong, is that used for access to any other properties, homes, garages, or anything?
No,
Okay, and its terminus to the east is the railroad?
the railroad, and to the west, I believe it stops behind my client, and then the neighbor to his west, I believe it just stops there.
Okay,
I think it terminates there, so there's nothing that goes
Okay.
to the south of any of these properties that's completely untraversable at this point. You
Okay.
can turn south on Armstrong, I recognize that, but there's really nowhere to go once you do unless you enter
Okay.
somebody's backyard.
but I think it's important that it's not currently being used as an access to any other home.
No, it would not create any line of sight issues, it wouldn't do anything to that a
Okay.
normal intersection would have as a consequence if there was a large structure there.
Okay. For what it's worth, the King's addition to the village of Temperance is probably one of the oldest platted subdivisions in Bedford Township. So it's unlikely that Armstrong will ever be developed, and it doesn't look like from the Google Earth map that would be any purpose in developing it. There once upon a time was a purpose, but I think the railroad put an end to that because they wouldn't approve a grade crossing going from west to east, or in the opposite direction to get across the railroad. So, for what that is worth in your deliberative process.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I'd like to make a motion.
please do.
Make a motion, we approve the variances as requested. That would be a plus or minus 40-yard setback, 800 square foot area variance, 3-foot height variance that may or may not be required, and a plus or minus 102 square foot rear yard area variance. Practical difficulties seem to be the corner lot has 2 front yard setbacks. The width of the lot is narrower than a typical R3 zone lot that's in today, and also it's replacing a previously existing accessory building. Contingent upon, obviously using permitted uses within an R3 zoned area, no commercial use, no business usage, that's not otherwise stated already in the R3 zoning.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it for discussion purposes.
Okay. We are open for discussion on this.
I guess the biggest concern again is just the size of the building, and I'm looking at the larger overview, and I honestly, I don't see anything near that size of buildings from an accessory building or a separate garage or anything like that.
Mr. Steiner, the one thing I would point out is I think that because we have that dead-end Armstrong at the back of it, this is a long building. The width of the building isn't the issue per se, it's the length of the building, because the width only exceeds the width of the house by a foot on each side.
Right.
But I would indicate that with that additional space that the former alley creates, even though it's included in the calculation, what we have to remember is that the natural cutoff of the backyards didn't originally factor that 18.5 to 36 or 37 feet into it.
Mm-hmm.
So really, we're going to have a longer building, but we've got a longer yard than what was intended for that plotted area. So, yeah, it is a little longer than what maybe it would appear seems appropriate, but we also have that unique dynamic where we've been given that extra space that wasn't intended when the entire area was platted out. So I think if you take that into consideration, it's probably proportionate to what's actually there. And again, it's not going to be something where I think if you were on the other subdivision to the south, looking back at it, it's not going to intrude in your direction, it's not going to seem overly burdensome, it's not going to be a monster in height, it's a very low, low structure, as low as it can be, so.
So then technically, Jody, the people on Santa Fe Court then technically have 18.5 feet on their side. So there's additional buffering, if you want to call it per se, of their 18 feet. And as tight as those houses are, it doesn't look like you're going to get back there to build anything sizable to bring a car down through. I mean, you could, but it's pretty tight. So it's not likely that they would be putting any kind of large structure back there.
Anybody else?
One dimension that I picked on that was noteworthy to me was the height. And since the height is within the limits imposed by the ordinance, this would probably be a much more obtrusive-looking structure if it was a typical, what I'll refer to as typical height of a 30 by 40 building, because some of them are pretty tall. Mm-hmm. And by necessity, some of them are tall because someone wants to park a motor home or a fifth wheel or something like that in it. This building would appear to be less obtrusive, even though it's 40 feet in length, because of the height stays within what is allowed by the ordinance. I think sometimes the obtrusiveness comes from the excessive height or the additional height, so just something to think about.
Far less imposing.
Right.
Well, and I know each each case has its own merit and everything to bear weight. Because I'm trying to just picture this building. I mean, recently I just noticed over on Stearns Road, probably just about right around being across from the church by Green Hills. There's a large building going up there, and it's the first thing to my mind. It's like, what size is that? Because that looks very disproportionate, and that guy's got a huge lot. And that's what pops into my mind when I'm thinking about this. You know, because I know that there's times where people, neighbors and such have said, oh yeah, I don't have any problem, but they don't really realize what a building looks like when it goes up and then you put that roof on. So I guess my last point of clarification, and I'll then leave it to my fellow board members. I did see something mentioned about 14 feet. So let's clarify that part.
Sure. And that one, like I said at the top of the conversation, that one is on me because the formula for determining building height, I knew that the apex of this building could be between 13 and 14 feet, but that's not how we determine the building height. And so I didn't factor that part of the equation in when I submitted the application. That was a cover myself request, because when you're talking about the pitch, we're not talking about the apex, and we're talking about maximum building height. So the equation that we've got in the back of your guys' packet, where you're multiplying the width by the pitch and then by half, and then by the actual height of the boards being used, you know, so we've got regular 2x6 construction with a couple of plates. So we're right there at the 8-foot mark, and so this analysis might even be a little conservative and a little higher that Dennis came up with. I believe Dennis did this. So I think we're well under the 12-foot mark here. But no, that was me being conservative and saying, because I don't know that formula, I'm going to ask for the variance and talk about it like we are right this second. I didn't want to not put it in my paperwork.
Right. So I'm just going to clarify with what I discussed with Jody earlier is, so instead of even being near that 14 and staying within the 12, it is calced at 11.52. So that actually, that variance can be removed from this motion. You did mention that too, didn't you, though?
Said if it was required.
Okay,
Right.
so, okay. That's all questions I have.
Do we have any other questions or discussion?
Called question.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Zebek?
Aye.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Mr. Welling?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thank you.
Well, next on the agenda is public comment. I see we're not really packing them in tonight. So, board and staff comments. Could we start with you, Jody, please?
We've had inquiries on a variance for the next meeting, but the deadline isn't until the April 15th, so
Okay, thank you.
keep posted.
Mr. Goldsmith.
Well, since the last meeting, we've had 5 new lawsuits filed against the Board of Zoning Appeals, and it is April Fool's Day.
Yeah, but what about those suits?
Yeah, but why would they file a suit for the ones that have been approved?
Spite. It's all spite. Mr. Steiner, any comments?
No comments.
Tom? You have anything?
No, I don't.
Nothing for me?
I'm good.
No comments.
Well, if nobody objects. I'm going to call this meeting adjourned.